Hello y'all. As I mentioned in my Raking Every Rainbow Road video, which you should definitely go watch if you haven't, my brothers and I got a Game Boy Advance SP several years ago from our uncle, and I was able to take it with me to college considering none of us have used it in a while. I took that opportunity to get a copy of Mario Kart Super Circuit off of eBay, and to my surprise, I've thoroughly enjoyed the game so far. Despite being older than I am by nearly 4 years, the gameplay is deceptively solid, and the tracks are some of the most inventive and creative tracks in the entire franchise. I finally got to enjoy the original versions of tracks that were heavily overhauled in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe for better or worse, and working my way up to the more difficult tracks, especially the Special Cup tracks I had never gotten to play before, felt immensely satisfying once I finally finished all the cups in first place in 50 and 100cc. And then I remembered that I got this game so I can play its retro tracks and make this video. Retro tracks serve two purposes: give older games and tracks a return to the spotlight, and pad out the content of the games they returned in. The second one is true, and you know it is, admit it. While they become the star of the show in later games, especially over the past 2 years, retro tracks had a rough start, which is surprising because there's two different places you could argue retro tracks started, so both times they sucked. And the first of these two appearances was in Mario Kart Super Circuit, which is certainly a weird start to this iconic part of the Mario Kart franchise. Up until the inclusion of DLC in Mario Kart, retro tracks had two hard rules. The tracks must be varied in the games they appeared in, and be tracks that had not returned as retro tracks before. There were also some soft rules like having a variety in which tracks were chosen theming-wise, and then the proportions of representation got weird as time went along, and the second rule already had a technicality before being thrown out entirely with DLC, and the technicality came to be because of Mario Kart Super Circuit's retro tracks, which followed none of these rules because they didn't exist yet. So it's time to talk about the elephant in the room. These are just the tracks from Super Mario Kart. That disqualifies the representation rule, and the fact that most tracks were variations on a theme with numbers at the end annihilates the theming trend. Add on to that all of the Super Mario Kart tracks have been used, making up the technicality in the second rule, and we have a very unorthodox start to retro tracks. In fact, many people don't even count these retro tracks for those very reasons, treating them more as an Easter egg than a feature. However, I decided to include them for this series because I could play the game, and there is an argument for them, but I denoted this as part 0 to account for the opposing argument, and I'll be spending a decent amount of time going over how the rest of these videos are going to go. Plus, most of this isn't Mario Kart Super Circuit's fault, and it's just because it's a product of its time with technical limitations thanks to being on the GBA. As far as these videos are going to go, I'm going to start with the unlocking method and what's available to be unlocked before talking about the tracks themselves. I'll be talking about the quality of the tracks themselves, the quality of the choices, and the changes from the original version of the track, if applicable. Finally, I'll put all the tracks on the tier list for overall quality, and give the retro selection a score out of 10. And with all that out of the way, let's get started with the Mario Kart Super Circuit retro tracks. Or should I say the Super Mario Kart tracks, and their unlocking method. Unlocking these tracks sucks so much, it's really convoluted and unnecessary, and I hate it. You have to start by unlocking the Special Cup, which requires beating every other cup in first place first. After beating the Special Cup in first place, you have to go back and finish every cup again with at least 100 coins collected, unlocking each cup's extra variant for that specific engine class. I don't understand why you can't just unlock all the cups you already had 100 coins in after beating the Special Cup in first place. Just having to go through all of them again is super frustrating. I don't understand how this works for a good while after getting the game, but even after figuring it out, I still think it's stupid. And yes, all of the retros are unlockable, unlike in future titles where at least one retro cup is unlocked from the start. So that's a lot of fun. Now on to the tracks themselves, and boy is there a ton to talk about. The Super Mario Kart tracks are not exactly much to look at or play, and the overlap is so thick you could cut it with a knife and spread it on toast. So I'm going to do something different, and instead of just going in order, I'm going to go based on track theme, which will be the only time I do this because the rest of the retros did an at least decent job of getting some variety in there. Although some are on thinner ice than others. And I won't talk about the quality of the tracks as choices because of how unusual the selection is compared to the other retro choices. Now let's talk about the tracks. Mario Circuit 1 certainly is the first track from Super Mario Kart. It's kind of shaped like a misshapen jelly bean, and it's about as satisfying as a singular jelly bean. And I guess it's fine, but there's so little going on with this course to make it stand out from the others. Mario Circuit 2, on the other hand, is phenomenal for a Super Mario Kart track. It's once again not much to look at, but the layout is pretty easily the best thanks to the fact that the track actually loops over itself, being the only track from Super Mario Kart to do that. Taking the turns, especially the U-turn in the end, is really fun, and of course, the big jump immediately after is super satisfying. Mario Circuit 3 is a massive step down in terms of layout, being just a bunch of turns without any front jumps on it. In addition, the turns don't feel particularly good to take, with the U-turn near the middle sometimes feeling outright impossible to do correctly. It's better than Mario Circuit 1, but it ain't great. Mario Circuit 4, on the other hand, is a lot of fun to drive on. While, much like Mario Circuit 3, it's just a bunch of turns to take, these turns are a lot more fun to actually pull off and feel fair, unlike Mario Circuit 3's ridiculously tight turns. I feel like this track gets slept on quite a bit, which is really unfortunate because I think it's amazing. These tracks used to have pipes in the off-road and sometimes on the road itself as obstacles, and there were oil spills on the road in some of these tracks, which are likely removed due to some form of technical limitations / consistency. Although I don't think they would have been too difficult to put into the fact that there aren't any obstacles anywhere else in the game that function like the pipes did, and including the oil spills but not the pipes would be weird, I'll give them a pass this time. I also really like the aesthetics of these tracks. They are just reused assets from the base roster, and the same applies for the rest of the tracks as well, but seeing Peach Circuit on Mario Circuit 1 and Mario Circuit 4, and Mario Circuit on Mario Circuit 2 and Mario Circuit 3 works really well. I kind of wish they put Luigi Circuit on Mario Circuit 3 instead, but it's a minor nitpick. And the music holds up surprisingly well for the GBA's limitations. Mario Circuit 1 and Mario Circuit 3 can go into C tier, and Mario Circuit 2 and Mario Circuit 4 will go into B tier. Donut Plains 1 is probably the most average track in the entirety of Super Mario Kart. It's fairly simple layout-wise, it's not too difficult, and it just kind of exists. The bridge is nice, but that's about all this track really has going for it. Donut Plains 2, however, might just be the most underrated track in this entire game. Sure, it's very similar to Donut Plains 1 layout-wise, and doesn't even have a bridge to make it stand out a bit, but unlike Donut Plains 1, if you have a mushroom, you can take a shortcut across the large body of water near the middle of the track, and it's super satisfying every time. In addition, the turns are somewhat challenging, but not too difficult, making them a lot of fun to do correctly. Donut Plains 3, on the other hand, sucks so much. The turns are absurdly difficult, thanks in no small part to how skinny the road is in some parts of the track, especially right at the beginning and right after the broken bridge. Although you can take a massive shortcut with the mushroom thanks to the jump at the broken bridge, it's not impossible to do, it's not my personal experience intending to do it. There used to be moles that stuck to your cart and stole your coins, and although there are Shy Guys that do the same thing in Sunset Wilds, I can imagine that having them in the ground instead of fence could be difficult for the GBA, so once again I can excuse it. The use of Riverside Park for the background of these tracks is certainly an interesting choice, but with how boring the original version of these tracks look, I'm willing to take uniqueness over accuracy, and I once again wished a different theme was used for a higher difficulty track, with Lakeside Park being a perfect fit for Donut Plains 3 instead of Riverside Park. And once again, the music holds up very well for the GBA. Donut Plains 1 can go into C tier, Donut Plains 2 will get B tier, and Donut Plains 3 gets D tier. Ghost Valley 1 is really basic and bland. This track is really easy without any particularly difficult sections, and the shortcut feels functionally useless now without the feather. You can take it with a mushroom by using the jump before it or just manually hopping over it, and that's incredibly precise and difficult to take successfully due to the speed after landing in the tight turn right before the finish. Ghost Valley 2 is a lot of the same from Ghost Valley 1, but slightly better. The turns are fine, and it's a bit more difficult than Ghost Valley 1, which I enjoy. However, the big thing now is that the shortcut is actually decently usable now. There's a disappearing wall that you can use to stop it falling off if you use a mushroom, but you can also use a star in this one and get across, which is significantly easier to do. Ghost Valley 3 is a lot of the same as Ghost Valley 1 and Ghost Valley 2, but slightly worse in my opinion. Now the turns are rather difficult compared to the other two, and while that makes sense for the track, it does feel a little unfair at parts. Once again, the shortcut is functionally unusable, but there are holes in the track that are fun to jump over. There aren't any major changes to speak of for these tracks, which is rather refreshing. Ghost Valley 1 and Ghost Valley 2 use Boo Lake for their background, while Ghost Valley 3 uses Broken Pier. Both make sense, but using the higher difficulty theme for the higher difficulty track is something that I love to add some variety and show progression, and I wish they did that more often. The music isn't particularly great, but then again it wasn't particularly great on the SNES. All three of these tracks go into C tier, I guess. I just don't really have any strong opinions about these tracks. Bowser Castle 1 is just really boring. I get that it's meant to be an easy track, but there's nothing going on whatsoever, and the turns are just 90 and 180 degree turns over and over again. Bowser Castle 2 gets a lot of flack for being the worst Super Mario Kart has to offer, but I don't agree with that at all. It's definitely a weird track layout-wise, and the dead end that used to be a feather shortcut is entirely useless now, but there's absolutely worse tracks here, like Donut Plains 3 and some others we haven't talked about yet. Bowser Castle 3, on the other hand, is actually really good. The multiple split routes add a lot to replayability and optimization, and the turns are a lot of fun to take due to their fair difficulty. However, I think these tracks suffer the most as actual remakes, because for some reason, the thwomps were removed. Yet the changes I've talked about so far I can make some justifications for, but with thwomps being in the base game as important parts of the new Bowser Castles, I have to take some hefty points off these tracks. Bowser Castle 1 and Bowser Castle 2 using Bowser Castle 1 and Bowser Castle 2 as their backgrounds makes perfect sense respectively, but Bowser Castle 3 uses Bowser Castle 1 again, and I would have loved if it had used Bowser Castle 3, or especially Bowser Castle 4 instead. Once again, the music holds up pretty well for the GBA. For the missing thwomps that absolutely should have been in there, I'm putting Bowser Castle 1 and Bowser Castle 2 in D tier, and Bowser Castle 3 in C tier. These three probably would have jumped up a tier if they had the thwomps. Choco Island 1 is a nice and simple little track. The piles of chocolate make for good hazards that generally don't harm me too much but are still worth avoiding, and the little jumps in the road are also a great addition. Choco Island 2, on the other hand, is annoying. The turns are ridiculously tight, the road is frustratingly narrow, and there's a giant pile of chocolate that takes forever to go through and you can't really avoid it unless you have a mushroom or a star or something. As far as hazards go, the stationary piranha plants were removed, but they weren't much of a threat anyway, so their absence doesn't mean much. However, the choice of background was certainly unique. There wasn't a chocolate-themed track at the base game, so the theme of choice for these tracks is Sunset Wilds, which seems kinda weird at first until you remember that the original Chocolate Island, the Super Mario World theme, the Chocolate Island tracks are based on Super Mario Kart, has a vaguely desert-themed background going on, at which point the choice to use a desert track makes sense. The music is pretty good once again, although the opening isn't quite as good as I would have liked. Choco Island 1 gets to go in B tier, and Choco Island 2 can go in D tier. Koopa Beach 1 is a basic island hopping circle track. The underwater parts of the track slowing you down as much as they do is pretty annoying, but the rest of it is pretty simple and enjoyable. Koopa Beach 2 is, once again, just annoying. The turns are really tight between the walls and green shrub things poking out from under them, and the water, and this is a section where it's ridiculously easy to fall into the deep water. There used to be bouncing Cheep Cheeps, but I don't think they were that much of a hazard to be missed all too much. And using Shy Guy Beach as the background makes perfect sense, but I honestly wish Koopa Beach 2 used Cheep Cheep Island instead, just to add some variety. And once again, the music is good. Koopa Beach 1 gets to go in C tier, and Koopa Beach 2 goes in D tier. Vanilla Lake 1 is a slippery, boring circle. It's impossible to control thanks to horrible ice physics, and the disappearing blocks that blend in with the rest of the track are one of the worst hazards in the entire franchise. Vanilla Lake 2 is also a slippery, boring circle. The ice physics are as bad as ever, and the disappearing blocks are somehow even worse in this track than the first one. There weren't any changes to these tracks' hazards, but I kinda wish there were because of those stupid ice blocks. However, despite all the negative things I've said about this track, I do have some praise to give it. The snowland background used on these tracks is absolutely beautiful, and I have no complaints in that regard. Similarly, the music is as good as it's always been, which is yet another thing I love about this track. That's not stopping me from putting both of these tracks in D tier, and I'll give them some credit where credit is due. And last but most certainly not least, we have Rainbow Road, which is really good as far as the selection is concerned. The turns are tight and the road is narrow, but it never feels unfairly so, seeing as this is the last and most difficult track in the bunch. However, the removal of the super thwomps really hurts this track, even if it does make sense considering the technical limitations of the Game Boy Advance. The base game Rainbow Road background is a great choice for this track, and it also received its own unique tiled road texture to be more similar to the original, which I really like. But then we get to the most disappointing part of this track, the music, which I don't think is nearly as bad as people make it out to be, but I also don't think it's great. This version of that track can go in B tier. And that's the list. It's extremely lopsided towards the bottom half, but considering it was the first go around and it was on a Game Boy Advance, it certainly wasn't half bad. However, on a scale of 1 to 10, I certainly don't feel bad giving it a 2 out of 10. It does have its good tracks in B tier, but they are vastly outweighed by the mediocre and outright bad tracks crowding out C and D tier. And on top of that, most of the tracks are brought down by being nerfed versions of their original iterations, as well as the inclusion of only Super Mario Kart tracks. Thanks for watching this video. The next part of the series, covering Mario Kart DS's retro tracks, will be out sometime in April, and if we can get to 25 subscribers before the video on Mario Kart 7 is out, I'll cover all the retros on Mario Kart 8 Deluxe again. So be sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment telling me about your favorite retro track from Mario Kart DS and why you like it. See y'all next time.